Sizzle Season 2024 had a lot of changes to their stages, and I mean a lot of changes. Of the 19 that existed prior to this season, 13 stages received some type of change to their terrain. So, how did Nintendo do? Well, there are winners and there are losers, and we're gonna take a look at them. If you enjoyed this video, hit that subscribe button and like the video. I don't want to waste any more time, so let's get right into the video. To make the ranking simple, I'm basically just gonna say if I think it's a winner or a loser, and I'm gonna have the following criteria. First, we need to consider that these stages receive different levels of changes. For example, Umami Ruins receives significant changes to its terrain in all modes, whereas Hagglefish Market receives slight changes in its terrain in all modes. I'll be taking the proportional change into account when ranking them. Basically, I'll only compare stages with slight changes to other stages with slight changes, and the same things for the stages with major changes. Second, I'll largely be considering the changes to ranked modes and see if they made any improvements. I don't really play Turf War, so it would be unfair for me to judge that aspect of the changes. And lastly, the most important criteria, that this is just my opinion. I know comment section, how dare I include my opinion in my video? Well, I have biases, and I want to be honest about that. There will be times I like or dislike something because of the weapons that I primarily play, or because of the stages and modes that I prefer. Will I be consistent? I'll try to be, but don't take this tier list to heart. It really is just meant to be a fun video, to share my thoughts, but to also hear from y'all on what y'all think. So feel free to let me know in the comments as well. I won't go over in detail all the changes they made, but we'll cover the changes I think are the most significant. Let's speedrun the stages with slight changes and then move our way up with the most changes. For the stages with slight changes, the winners are Flounder Heights, Hagglefish Market, Marlin Airport, and Crab Lake Capital. These maps are all winners because they introduce some element that makes it easier for me to use slosher weapons. For example, Flounder now has these steel grates, which will give me an additional space to contest the enemy and the zone. In Hagglefish Market, you can now jump on these stacks, and if I'm using Machine Neo, I can use Trizuka from this spot and arc my shots to kill whatever backline is standing on the canopy. Both Marlin and Crab Lake receive small obstacle changes with a new block or stack of blocks. Having new obstacles to play around is always a plus for AoE players, whether you play Slosher, Blaster, or Roller. And to be honest, that's enough for me, as they introduce new areas to fight around or take cover, especially considering that they're somewhat around the zone or your retreat options. As for the losers, Manta Maria, Eotel Valley, and Bluefin Depot are the losers for the slightly changed stages. The main reason I put these in losers is that for me, I feel like these stages had a missed opportunity. For Manta Maria, the biggest difference is including this block on the right side for zones and ramp for tower control. These are small little changes, but I wish they would have just added a block back that's present on Clan Blitz on other modes and call it a day. We had this block present in other modes like tower control in Splatoon 2, and this was an opportunity to introduce it again. Eotel added this small block to make it easier for you to jump on these bigger blocks, and I wish they would have just extended it and made it paintable for a Squid Surge spot. This stage has a Squid Surge spot on tower control, and for a game that introduced Squid Surge, we unfortunately don't have a lot of cool spots to use it, so it's a missed opportunity. And lastly, you might be surprised that Bluefin is here because, to be fair, it did make a pretty big change for Clan Blitz. The big issue with the stage is that it was difficult when attempting to push in and score in the enemy basket since the enemy always had height advantage. For Clan Blitz, they added a rail on the left side to help with accessing the enemy basket. The change is good, but its execution is poor. It's good in the sense that it gives you an alternative way to access the enemy basket, but it adds another route where you're pretty much exposed, and it could be easy for the enemy to pick you off. Moving on to the stages that had substantial changes, let's start off with Brinewater Springs. The biggest issue with this stage is how cramped it felt, and they addressed it by expanding two areas in particular. First, they expanded the right side connected to your spawn, and I think this is a really good change for tower control because it gives you extra room and cover to work with to defend the tower. And second, which I think is the biggest improvement, is expanding the left drop on the stage with additional space and cover. By expanding the left drop, it introduces a better flank option, and if someone tries to fight you, you have cover to help you fight or get away. This flank was always about risk and reward. If you drop and are not caught, you can get a sneaky play, but if you are caught, you can get punished for it. So improving this aspect of the stage is really good. They also made some nice adjustments for Clan Blitz and Rainmaker. For example, in Clams, in mid, there's a small island which gives you different height elevations. Backlines tend to dominate here, so having this height elevation to contest is nice. In Rainmaker, there's also more poles, guys. We cannot have an update without getting more poles. Just imagine using a Zipcaster weapon and using the pole on the Rainmaker route to your advantage. I for sure will be using Slosher Deco here for some aggressive Zipcaster plays. Overall, the changes address the biggest problem for the stage, and that makes it a winner. Next is Museum de Alfonsino. I'll be honest with you, I already thought Museum was a good stage. It had a couple of problems, but nothing that was too glaring like the extremely compact problem Brinewater had. So when I saw the stage getting a change, I was a bit worried. Sometimes in terrain changes, you run the risk of overcomplicating a stage, and I didn't want that to happen here. For the most part, Museum seems to focus on making elements of the stages that already feel good better, and I really like that approach. For example, on zones, having the sponge right by spawn to access top right is helpful if you need to change the direction quickly depending on the location of the enemy. They also expanded this left drop, giving you more room to work with if you're being rushed, and reworked the spinner to have 2 spinners as opposed to 3. The biggest positives for me though were the changes to Rainmaker and Clamblitz, where they made adjustments to improve the accessibilities to areas. For example, in Rainmaker, they made it easier for you to dunk the Rainmaker from mid if you decide to use this route as opposed to going right. By making such a small adjustment that helps you with the objective, it feels nice. They also did this with Clamblitz, where this block was improved to make it feel less awkward to jump on to get to the enemy plat. These changes aren't as big as, say, expanding a whole area like Brinewater, but because it improved how you interact with the objective, whether it's Rainmaker or scoring in Clamblitz, I think that's a winner for me. Next up is Hammerhead Bridge, which was one of those stages that was advertised to be changed, and I've said in prior videos, this is arguably one of the stages that I think is the hardest to rework given its vertical layout. The big issue with the stage is that you can get locked out pretty bad, and the options to getting back into mid can put you in a difficult spot. Nintendo did say in their patch notes that this change was to increase routes, and they did just that. You have this route near your plat area where you can drop onto the right side of the stage, but it is important to note that this is a one-way drop, meaning if you need to retreat from this area, you either jump out or go back through mid. They did include mode-specific items as well, such as having a sponge on the left side for splat zones, additional blocks for Rainmaker, and even more poles for Clamblitz, which once again gives more Zipcaster options. They did, however, remove the ability to zip under the stage, which kinda sucks. I'll be honest, I think for a stage that was advertised as one of the bigger changes, it is pretty disappointing. But like I said, I think this stage is arguably one of the harder ones to fix, and I think for the changes they made, I'll give Nintendo an A for effort. It is hard fixing vertical layout stages without making them too one-sided in my opinion. For that, I'll say it's an honorary winner. Since we're talking about stages that were advertised, let's talk about Barnacle and Dime real quick. Unlike Hammerhead, I think this is one of those stages that has a lot of potential to be fixed. The biggest issue with this stage is similar to Hammerhead Bridge in that once you're pretty much locked out, it is very difficult getting back into mid. And it was very apparent from Nintendo that they also wanted to increase the route options to this particular stage. The biggest change that this stage received was getting this alternative route on the left side, which is also a one-way drop. It's a route that basically gives you additional access to mid without having to heavily rely on retaking the right side to get the zones, for example. This left drop is cool, but it would have been nice if they added a sponge to be able to retreat. This drop is kinda like Brinewater's left side, where there's a risk reward in taking this route, but the height difference isn't that substantial, where adding a sponge wouldn't be possible, for example. They also made some quality of life adjustments, such as removing the glass near your spawn area, including more obstacles such as mini poles, and more cover to make the stage feel less attacker-sided. Are these changes enough to make the stage feel less attacker-favored and less snowbally? Probably not. I think for Tower, Rainmaker, and Clams, this stage went from an F tier to a D tier, but for zones, I think these changes are substantial enough to make a difference. In tournaments, Barnacle was pretty much absent for anything outside of zones, so because the changes that were made have the biggest impact on the mode that is more relevant to competitive play, I think this stage is a winner, but by the thinnest margins. Basically, it'll feel better in competitive, but in solo queue, good luck stopping all those custom range blasters on Barnacle tower control. We finally get to our last two stages, and one of these stages is the biggest loser and the other is the biggest winner in my opinion. The biggest loser is Scorch Gorge, and let me get my bias out of the way. I love this stage, but only on a couple of modes. Scorch Rainmaker is one of my favorite map mode combinations in Splatoon 3, so when I saw that they added a couple of blocks in the court area of the stage, I was a bit disappointed. And yeah, let me make something very clear. Yes, I as a bucket player should be happy getting more obstacles on the stages to play around, but putting blocks here so close to a pole that already existed makes the court area feel very cluttered and awkward when attacking or defending. Second, and more importantly, when it comes to map changes, you either improve elements that already feel good like Museum, or address the bigger issues with the stage like Brine Water. Why not address Scorch Rainmaker's biggest problem, which is turtling the Rainmaker on the bottom right side of the stage? You get a substantial lead, and rather than pushing, you leave the Rainmaker in this area and basically camp it. But this isn't what influenced me to put it in losers ultimately. What I think makes this stage a loser is that it didn't address the issues with zones, which is arguably its worst mode. The biggest issue with this map mode combination is that it's basically a death pit. Once you drop, the only way to retreat is having to walk on the steel grates to get back to cover or to jump out. Take Museum for example. Once you drop, there's basically no ramp, but you can still get back onto your plat by jumping on the spinner and taking that route to it. Walking on steel grates versus swimming with your ink and jumping across is very different. Overall, I think when you compare this stage to the others with significant changes, it does feel like a disappointment of a change. That being said, I think this next stage really caught me off by surprise with the changes that it made, and that's Umami Ruins, who I think is the biggest winner out of all these changes. Umami wasn't a good map, but it also wasn't a bad map. It was pretty much mid. It had some good elements where you had different alternative routes to get into mid, but those routes, whether it was the left drop or the dome on the right side, were pretty much underdeveloped. Fortunately for us, the patch addresses those issues and adds even more. Let me just list off a couple of changes that this stage got. It expanded the right side of your spawn to help with retakes when the enemy is near your spawn. The dome area has been improved to give you more space for retakes. You now have an ink rail in that same area, which can also help with retakes. The left drop was expanded, giving you additional space alongside this wall, now being paintable, which will be helpful for retakes. There are now safeguards around the stage, which prevents you from falling off the stage, and I know dually players are really loving this particular change. You have additional cover in mid with these blocks, and the zones were slightly tweaked with a unique shape. And I've been talking about splat zones only for this stage. Let's look at Rainmaker real quick. In Rainmaker, they made it easier for you to get onto these grates, and because they made it easier for you on your side, they made it easier for you to get on the enemy side as well. Basically, we just gained a new Rainmaker route. And obviously, the left side will still be the preferred side because you could actually swim in that side. But the point I'm trying to make is that they're at least trying to give us more accessibility when it comes to helping around the objective. If you ever find yourself in a situation where the enemy is just putting themselves all on the left side, take the right side on the grates and it could get you some points. Overall, I think all the stages are pretty positive, and even those that I classified as losers are truly winners, so I give Nintendo a big fat W for this latest update. Let me know if you agree and what stages you like the most after this update.